Hello and welcome everybody to the latest installment in our UXDX online series. We have another fantastic lineup of speakers for you tonight, and I know that's why you're really here and you're really excited to learn from what our speakers have to share. But I want to give a very quick introduction to what it is we do at UXDX and why we host these sessions. So at UXDX, our mission is to help teams shift from building software through waterfall projects to using empowered autonomous product teams. And that's our mission because we believe in a high change environment, which, to be fair, most of us are working in, where there's new competitors, new technologies, new products appearing all the time. In that kind of an environment, you really need people who are close to the customers, really understanding their pain points and being able to iterate and move, kind of experiment their way towards a working solution. Now, that's really easy to say. Oh, we'll just shift from working in projects and now we're going to be product teams and empowered. But it's really hard to do in practice. And that's where these talks come in. So this is where we invite people from product, UX, design, and dev to share their experiences of how they're changing their ways of working to move towards this more agile and product team structure. Now, hopefully, as the talks are going on, you have some questions, because that means that you're thinking about how can I apply this information in my context? And the speakers would love to hear your questions as well. So please do ask them. There's the chat box on the side on UXDX website, or if you're watching through YouTube, LinkedIn, or wherever, you can ask your questions there, and I'll put them to the speakers. And sometimes we can't get through all the questions in the time, which is a good sign that people are engaged. But that means when we do have that, we do have the UXDX community Slack group. And in there's one of the channels is Ask the Speakers. So any questions that we don't have time to get through today, we'll put in there and we'll put those questions to our speakers. But that's enough about me and UXDX. You're here to actually listen to what our speakers have to say. And our first speaker of this evening is Itamar, who's the co-founder and CPO of People Ltd. And he'll be talking about the power of customer feedback for a successful product roadmap. So welcome, Itamar.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And let us dive right into it. So I want to start, first of all, just making sure you see my screen, you see the slides?
Yep, everything's perfect.
Everything good? Okay, yeah. So thank you so much for having me. So yeah, so Great People, our product, our platform is known as Afogata. And while we deal with user feedback, of course, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk a bit more generally how, as product managers, we can use user and customer feedback, how we can use it and integrate it into our product decision making in a really viable way. And I think it's an interesting topic because it's not trivial, and we wanna get a few things kind of, if we can. We don't have a long time for this talk, so my goal, like for this short talk, is really just to kind of plan the idea of how you can use user feedback and how it could be meaningful and can move the needle, and how can you actually work with it, because there's definitely challenges involved. We're going to look at a few hurdles and a few issues that are, maybe stopping you from doing that today, and maybe some ways that you could overcome them. And really the goal is to be actionable, right? So get some ideas rolling, so anyone, on any budget can really start incorporating that into their process in a way that works for them. And hopefully, we manage to get all that done in the short time that we have. And I thank everyone for joining. And if you have questions, of course, feel free to post them. I would love to address any and all questions. I think it would be very helpful to have a discussion. And let's get started. So I think a good place to start thinking about this is, first of all, a lot of obviously, I'm sure every product manager on this call, on this webinar, has tools that they use already, right? So probably product analytics, I'm guessing, most everyone uses. There's a lot of other stuff that may be in place, right? Maybe you have a customer advisory board, which is really great to have. Some people do focus groups, maybe becoming a bit more rare, but still definitely done in many good companies. If you have a brand monitoring tool, then it's actually pretty unique. I don't think a lot of product managers use that. That's pretty good, but some Some companies and some teams do use it to some extent, maybe directly or maybe indirectly. They have other stakeholders that provide them with reports, for example. And I will mention personas, and I don't want to talk too much about that, mainly because I think personas as a model has a lot of weaknesses. But we have all these things that give us some kind of view, some kind of reflection of user behavior, of course, but also maybe user sentiment or how people perceive our product or things like that. So the question is really, I think, why would you want to look at user feedback directly? And we're going to address that, and I think if we really look at all these things that we have, they're really great tools, they are important, but they're not reflecting to us the feedback of our own users who actually use the product directly. Maybe they're reflecting a model, right? Or like personas. It's a model, it's not, maybe it's based off of actual users or actual people, but it's still a model. It's not, the map is not the territory, right? It's not reality. Focus groups can give us a great sample, it can give us maybe very useful in-depth feedback, but still they're not our users who are actually experiencing the product day to day necessarily, and it's not in real time, right? And it's something you can do only very occasionally. So really, it's not replacement for direct user feedback. Customer advisory board, that's great, but again, that's probably your most engaged customers, very thoughtful customers. And lastly, product analytics. It gives us the behavior, it gives us the what. Super important. I don't think any product manager would want or should go without it, but it reflects the behavior, not necessarily the reasoning or the thinking behind it, right? So that's the idea. Even when we have all these tools, and of course there are other things that I didn't mention here, but there is a lot of value in getting the direct user feedback. Now, before we talk how to do that, I want to talk about why actually not to use customer or user feedback, right? And there's actually great reasons, and I think um, a lot of product managers, a lot of people who I talk to in various organizations, and really, I don't know who we have on this call and what their practices are, obviously, and I would love to hear that. But I talk to a lot of product managers who are, top-notch professionals in really great world-class companies, and they don't really use customer feedback directly. And obviously, they have very good reasons, right? And not only because it's tricky. And the first is, sometimes it's just a vocal minority, right? Oh, I'm sure anyone here at least heard perhaps someone else say it if they did not think about that themselves, right? Oh, this thing that we hear, it's just a bunch of people who are super vocal, they're very online, whatever. They're not really reflecting the user behavior because, look, I'm looking at the analytics and it doesn't reflect what, all these complaints are about, right? So that's one thing, one major thing. Secondly, is the idea that really user feedback can really teach you something new, right? Because people complain about the same thing. Like anyone who has, I'm just giving examples, but let's say if you have an ad monetized app, or if you have a free to play game, or all these things that involve ads or payments or things like that, people will always complain about them, right? So a lot of people have the view that like, hey, I look at it, I read reviews or whatever. If people are complaining about those things, of course they will complain about them. It's not really signal. I understand why they're saying that, but it's nothing, nothing that really should drive our decision making or that we can do much about. And the third big reason is, that kind of the idea is that it's all really just fluff. Okay, I try to read some reviews, but if you can't really quantify it, someone said something, maybe it even sounds intelligent, it's a good point, but what does it really mean? It reflects one person's opinion, and it's, and in order to get even those good opinions or those like valid feedbacks, you have to sift through so much fluff, so much even like garbage in certain cases. There's definitely a lot of noise. So again, it's a very good reason why perhaps user feedback is not incorporated into your processes or into process of other really great companies or product managers that you know. Now, I think if we talk about actually using it, it's important to think how user feedback fits into the overall methodology, right? And while I didn't want to go with a specific methodology, there's a lot of, there's several at least good product management methodologies of, how you plan your roadmap and how what drives decisions and all of that. So I didn't want to be too specific here. Um, my point is really that user feedback is not one thing. It's not just like, oh, let's do our strategy and product roadmap and whatever, the way that we do it, that's our methodology. But let's see if users are complaining about whatever, about bugs, right? Or they talking about our competitors, or it's something that, they're, or they only look at it in the context of a user acquisition strategy or things like that, right? Or let's only look at it in the concept, in the context of, user satisfaction. Like we're going to measure CSAT, and we want to see that people are happy in general. So all these things, are valid, but really all these things and other, including the strategy and even the mission of what you're doing, right? Probably the mission that you as a product manager, as a project, as a company have, the mission is ultimately about serving people in one way or another, right? That's what we all do. So probably what people have to say about the way that you're serving them is meaningful. So the user feedback can fit in really any of those contexts, any of those stages, or any of those drivers for your strategy. And it's not one thing, and that's really the point. The user feedback can definitely affect strategy, even affect the mission, or show you that perhaps we have this mission, but we're not in complete alignment with it yet. So that's why it can be quite a good thing to integrate into our process in a way that can affect things across the board. It's not just one corner; it's really all around. Okay, so if I've convinced you, or if you're already convinced, you think, okay, maybe if I incorporate some user feedback into my process, it could be useful. What about those issues that we just saw, right? The fluff, the noise, the vocal minorities, all that stuff. What do you do about them? So let's try to look at them and see if we can find together some useful ways to address them, right? And to deal with user feedback in a constructive way, despite the challenges it presents that are definitely real challenges. So let's start, from the first one, the vocal minority issue, right? And that's like, okay, this, hopefully people know this meme. It's basically someone who's, everything is because of the aliens, right? So it's the same people. It's the same vocal minority. It's those users who are always saying that. I'm ignoring that. It's not meaningful. It's nothing. So it's definitely, to be very, very clear, it's a very real concern. I think for many products, you would have specific audiences, specific groups of users that may or may not even represent the users that you're actually are meant to serve, or that are your best users, or that you have product market fit for. And those users may have feedback that is not really something you want to act on. It's not in line with your strategy. Maybe they shouldn't even be there, quote unquote, because your product is not meant for them, or whatever it may be. Or maybe they're just a small group that doesn't really reflect your audience at large. And I can give I'm sure people here have examples for what they experienced. I can give you an example from I had in my previous company, we had apps where you had a discussion function, right? And it wasn't the main goal of the apps. It was kind of something that was added to create engagement, and it worked really well. The problem is that in some cases, because it was it was present in a lot of different communities, and in some cases, you would have those people who would just really enjoy a very abrasive style of conversations. And I don't know if anyone dealt with online discussions, but it can be hell, right? But there are certain people who really enjoy that kind of interaction, but most people, especially the people who are not necessarily participating, they don't like to observe that. They're not seeking that necessarily. So the vocal minority is very real. Like, how would you give those people an outlet if you at all want to give them an outlet? Or maybe the people who want to have abrasive discussion, you want to just drive them off completely. You don't want them there. So that's a separate question. But the point is really there are these vocal minorities, and you need to take into account whether the feedback is coming from them or not. So the first thing that I would say, and I think not always do we see that kind of thinking, is that the feedback channels in your community, whether it's in the product or outside of the product, are actually product too. They're part of how people experience your product, right? So this is a thing that sometimes, we manage a product and we think, okay, I'm building whatever it is, right? This service, this app, this SaaS application, whatever it may be. So this is your product. This is what I'm making decisions about. That's true, but the way that your users are experiencing it, or your customers, they're experiencing it from the first moment that they're considering to use something like that, right? Or they have a question and they go online, they seek an answer, or whatever it is. So those things, in a way, are part of your overall experience of the product. So if you don't have a supportive community, for example, and maybe you should have, of course, it depends exactly what your product is, but this is something to think about. Maybe you want to build a community that you own. Maybe you want to have a Discord server, which is a great solution. And not only, of course, classically for gaming or things like that, but definitely not only for that. Maybe you want to have a Discord server for your users. Maybe you want to build those feedback channels in the app or in the product, wherever it may be, in a way that's contextual and really low friction, and would get you those useful feedbacks that you can act on. And the way people provide feedback, the way people experience your product and experience to other users and can ask questions and provide feedback and share their pains. Whether like I said, a Discord community, or maybe there's a subreddit of users, maybe a subreddit of users that your users created, and you don't even have presence there. And it sounds weird, but it's actually the case for a lot of companies, a lot of products. There's like communities are online and they're not even participating there necessarily. And this is kind of a shame, because even though you can't really control that, you can participate, you can steer, sometimes you can build up communities that you own. And that experience of people sharing feedback, asking questions, being in a constructive environment is part of the product experience at large. So definitely something to think about. And I think actually can be done at a pretty low cost. Very interesting things can be done, right? So that's the first thing. If you kind of think, if you design this thing as a whole, if you design your community, you can also get more useful conversations, more useful feedback beyond that vocal minority that will always complain about something, whatever it is in your product's case. So that's the first point here, right? The first way to address, it's very important. And the second thing is to really have, and we'll talk a bit about that, and really, it's not about having a specific tool, right? It's about having a way to get the data, whatever it may be, right? Maybe it's App Store reviews, maybe it's incoming messages in your ticketing system, whatever it is. And you can use very primitive things, right? You can use, whatever, a Google spreadsheet, whatever it is that you want to use. You don't have to buy a specialized tool, but it's important to stratify and really apply rigor in your analysis. And maybe there's, you want to get all those feedbacks that are kind of like, oh, it's the same people. And it depends on really what the case is, but maybe it could be according to a specific user trait, a specific type of complaint, or whatever it is. But really get that out of the way, and use simple tooling or complicated tooling depending on what you have in place, and really be able to get that out of the way and look at the other stuff. And really, there's a lot of ways to do that. But the point is, even if you have a lot of noise, get it out of the way. You can do the analysis, and that may require different levels of sophistication in getting to that end result. But you can do that, and then you'll find that after you move the noise, there's actually really useful stuff. And the third way to address this, and this will also, and this will be something that will serve us really across the board, is correlate it with the observed behavior, right? I'm sure, like I said, probably everyone here has some kind of in product or in app analytics, things like whether it's like Google Analytics or Mixpanel or Amplitude and so forth. So many great solutions out there. And correlating between that and the feedbacks is something that is actually, I would say, not at all often done. It's pretty rare, actually, that product managers do that. And if you're doing that, way to go, because I talk to a lot of product managers, and it's not common at all. But when you look at the analytics, obviously you see the observed truth, where you see what people are actually doing. But if you look at the kind of feedbacks that you're getting and the points in time that you're getting them, if you see spikes in specific things, right? People, they complain about this thing at a specific point in time, or after this release that we made, or after this, let's say if you're in gaming, so there's like live ops and there's like, or different things in different types of products that maybe you've had a special kind of, special release or a change that you made for a period of time, or whatever it is. And you can correlate what you observe in your analytics with what people are saying, right? And it can give you the reasons behind the behavior, right? You see the behavior, you don't know what happened, but looking at the feedback, you can understand more. So this is also a way to kind of sift through all this data, all this noise, and get to something that is beyond what perhaps a small group of users might be saying. So now for the second big reason why user is too easy to ignore, right? And that is pretty much the idea that, hey, it's nothing new. We know, the pricing. Yeah, the pricing. You don't like paying. Nobody likes paying. I don't like paying. Nobody likes ads. I don't like ads. That's not signal. That's not signal, and you can ignore it. And yes, that's true. People will always complain about certain things. And here the way to address it is, threefold, and some of these are kind of also continuing what we just talked, but some of these are a bit different. So one, you want to have some tooling in place, and like I said, you see here, that's kind of a screenshot of our product, but it's really not about that. You could, like I said, very real. You can use Google Spreadsheets, you could use Airtable, you could use any kind of product that works for you, and today there's really great ones. But if you can filter the type of things that are always repeating, right? Okay, people are always complaining about the ads. People are always complaining about being a purchase. People are always complaining about our price points, whatever it is. filter that out, right? You want to have a tool that allows you to filter things out in an intelligent way. Maybe, you know, it's some semantics, some linguistic analysis, or maybe just keywords. You know, you're doing it in Google spreadsheets, and you're filtering those keywords out, and you're getting, you know, you're getting 80% of the value, and you're getting it for free. That's great too. Just get it out of the way and look at the other stuff, right? And because a lot of the times, and I know it sounds simplistic, but this is reality. A lot of people just like, yeah, I go and I read the App Store reviews, and you know, that's what I get. Okay, that's very nice, because a lot of people don't actually read all the reviews, especially for products that have, you know, hundreds and thousands and more. For, you know, for a big consumer product, you would have huge amounts of reviews, and reading through them is actually not easy. But that's why, yeah, you can get that data, get it off to whatever works for you, and filter that out. Get the things that are repetitive out of the way, or even the things that you expect. Right? I don't want to hear about the ads. I know that we have annoying ads. Let's see what other things people are saying. So that's the first point. Now, the second point is really about the volume, right? Because the thing is, yes, people complain about, you know, those things that I mentioned about the ads, right? Let's take it as an example. So sure, they will always complain about it, but the way they complain about it, and especially the volume, which is an easy one, that can change. And sometimes, you know, maybe you switch to a different ad provider, right? Or your ad provider added a new type of ad unit to the mix, or some kind of new advertiser, or you have filtering in place for specific um, categories of advertising, but some new ad that, you know, of course, it's not like you're selling the ad, you're working with some providers, right? For many companies. So maybe a new type of ad, or a new advertiser somehow got around the filtering. They actually have something that you feel, hey, that should be only really displayed to, you know, that should not be shown to kids, but somehow they got over the filtering, and your product also has kids as users, which is, of course, very, very sensitive. So those things are actually very important to track, right? You want to see the volume, you want to see if something new is coming up within that same theme. And that is actually the danger of ignoring things that are, hey, always, people are always complaining about that. Because there could be changes about it, right? Like things change, and you want to see, sure, people always complain about the ads, but after this last release, or after this such and such date, suddenly the volume spiked and it's like 3 times as much. Let's look into it. It's worth looking into it, because probably there's something that happened, right? The ads are way more annoying, whatever it may be. So really looking at the trend, even if it's like an obvious thing that people always say, that can really teach you a lot. And again, that's very easy to do, right? Even if you, like I said, take all the data, put it on a Google spreadsheet or whatever you want to use, graph it out, and you'll see, oh, look at that, this weird spike. What did happen here? We didn't do anything, but something happened, right? Look at that, whatever. Google, like there's a new advertiser, there's a new ad unit, whatever it may be. So that can be very, very useful. And the third thing, and this is, you know, repeating what we said earlier, but here too, correlating it with observed behavior, right? You want to see if those things that people complain about, especially it like ebbs and flows, there's trends and things like that. You want to see if, for example, look at your cohort analysis, your retention. Is it being affected? Do you see some correlation between the volume of this like repetitive thing that people are always complaining about? Does it at all correlate with engagement, with cohorts that are more retaining or not? And again, it sounds simple, but it's not so often done, and it's not hard to do. You just need to have the data, have the right tooling in place, and have it as part of your process. So it's definitely something that can be done. And looking at that, looking at the observed behavior and the feedbacks can really teach you a lot. And really, the third big reason is, you know, it's all fluff, right? Blah blah blah. You know, so much noise, so much things that are pretty much useless or meaningless, and you have to go through so much stuff to get something that is really meaningful. And even if it's meaningful, it doesn't really necessarily represent anyone. It's not. It's getting hard. It's very hard to get statistical validity with that sort of data. So that is also, like I said, very real pain point. So how do you address that? So first thing, and yeah, this is also about having some kind of tooling in place, having some kind of process in place, right? But here you want to really be a bit more rigorous. You want to have the statistics. You want to be able to look at things and see if specific patterns, specific things are repeating in certain ways. You know, go kind of beyond the fluff, beyond the blobs of text that people are maybe posting, and try to look for specific semantic themes, for specific keywords, for specific things that are repeating, for something that maybe you know, kind of goes above a certain threshold. And it's very hard if you have, you know, if you have millions of reviews, which obviously some consumer products have. It's not like you're going to read it all. So that's why it's like you get a feeling, okay, it's fluff. So you want to have some sort of way to, and here, it can get really sophisticated, right? Maybe you do some clustering, maybe you do some semantic analysis, but maybe, you do something super simple. You look at a few keywords, and sure, some people may talk about the same thing, but use a different keyword, and it's okay. You have enough data. So even if you use very simple keyword search, in a Google spreadsheet, like I said, and graph it out, see what's coming up, and you can really identify those things that are beyond the fluff, that really indicate some kind of trend, indicates something that you may want to pay attention to. So really hope in this short conversation, we kind of managed to show how you can take user feedback, you can take customer feedback and incorporate into what you do, right? But I want to make it very real. I want to, to be useful. I want to really have something actionable that we could do. So what's next? What can we do as a follow-up to that, right? And the first thing I'd say, incorporate some kind of user feedback processing into your iteration planning, right? And I intentionally say iteration planning. It doesn't have to be that, but I think what we want to avoid is saying something which actually happens a lot is like, okay, once, when we do our quarterly planning or something, we're gonna see, you're gonna also incorporate user feedback and see if it's something meaningful there, right? And that kind of goes back into what I was discussing earlier about that user feedback does not belong necessarily in one bucket of what a product manager takes into account or does. It really takes part in everything. It can affect everything. It's from optimizing that certain thing that causes people to churn to aligning with the company's mission. So it's a really small grain stuff, and also, kind of the very big stones that we want to make sure that we have in the right place. And I think the way to incorporate it and the way to make it into a real utility is have it really as something to do frequently enough. Now, it needs to be easy. It can't be too heavy, but that's a problem. Sometimes companies have really heavy processes. They have some textual analysis tools, and you have to feed them tons of data, and you get some kind of report, or you have 5 analysts working on it. It's like you do it once every blue moon, and it doesn't really affect much, right? Right? It's so the idea is do something light, do something easy that you can do frequently enough in order to actually affect your decisions. And more than that, if you are exposed to the themes, to the insights from user feedback frequently enough, your mind will also be shaped by that, right? You'll have a better understanding, better intuitive understanding of your users and what might be bothering them, and you'll see things repeating. So really, I can't stress this enough. Hopefully I pass this message along. Do it in something that is maybe easy, maybe simple, maybe even stupid, but you can do frequently enough. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing is really, the rubber needs to meet the road, right? Take a couple of things that we discussed and apply them. It doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe you only take, you're not gonna listen to this community that you have. You're only gonna look at reviews, or you're gonna only talk, only maybe take your community, or something that it doesn't have to be perfect. Even if it's one source, maybe you're not looking at everything. Maybe you're looking at only a specific subset of things that are really accessible to you. It's all good, but something you can start with. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's a great place to be. And the third thing is really to think about that aspect of how do I shape the feedback channels? How do I shape the entire experience around the product of people sharing, conversing, helping other users perhaps, and sharing feedback with me? So it's more useful, but yeah, I use the word wholesome, right? And why wholesome? I think, and this is, we could talk about that a lot. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I think it's very important nowadays, and a lot of smart companies we see are very much thinking about how do you create a user community that is wholesome, right? Avoiding toxicity. Like fighting toxicity is very important. The online space, anyone who spends some time online can see it's so toxic, right? And probably if you have a product with a meaningful user base, it may be present there as well. And I think it's on us as product managers to also think, how do we structure engagement and interaction, and who gets a voice in a way that creates a welcoming community? Because how people are experiencing your community, their fellow users, is also part of the product. So these are 3 things that I hope are useful and actionable enough that you can do. Like building a community, very easy. Maybe you want to start a Discord server. Maybe you want to incorporate a feedback channel. A lot of ways that really you can act on that. And I think this is it. So hopefully, if there are any questions, happy to answer that. And I thank everyone for joining.
Great, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to, because I know all too often how you kind of get that people just dismissing the law of small numbers, like where you've only got 10 people saying something or 6 people. So no, that was really helpful. So thank you.
Of course.
We do actually, we're out of time. There was one question that came in just about how, so the one objection they continuously get is, well, I know what's needed. So it's not even that the research, the problems with the research, is just we don't need it at all in the first place, because yeah, it's kind of, we already know. We are out of time. So what I'll do is I'll invite you to the Slack channel. I'll post that question in the Slack channel. And if you could come and answer it there, that would be fantastic.
Of course, we'd love to.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Itamar. So up next, we're supposed to have Kaylin join, but unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, she's not able to join. So what we're going to do instead is I'm actually going to share a case study that we had yesterday, which was a fantastic case study about how UX can actually solve performance issues. So what I'm going to do is share the video of that recording. And if you do have any questions, Alessandro will be happy to answer those. So just bear with me a second.
You can all hear me okay? Audio is a little bit funny, but yeah. Hope you can see my screen and hear me well.
It's all perfect on our end here. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. So today, I guess I'll try to answer this question. Can UX solve software performance issues? And I guess you know the answer already, because I added a spoiler to the title of this presentation. And so yes, of course, UX can solve technical issues, but I guess the question then is how. And so what I really want to do today is share with you a product story that will not only touch on the great success achieved by my team, the Red Hat UXD team, but also on the how we managed to get to it, maybe in a way that some might find a little unconventional. So without any further ado, let's just dive right in and do the important talking first. Here is, you can see what we achieved in a nutshell. We managed to reduce page loading time on the homepage of one of our products by 96%, which is pretty awesome result and not something you would hear of every day. And in the chart, you can see that we were able to basically reduce this page loading time to 1.5 seconds on our latest release, as opposed to a much longer time that it would take to load the page on previous releases, or it actually took, but wait a moment. You might wonder what this has to do with design and how we managed to do all of that. And that's a question I've asked in a couple of previous presentations that I gave on this topic, and I got a bunch of interesting answers, starting with the most common solutions that you would think of to solve performance issues, like you refactor the code, you improve caching, you remove dependencies, maybe some more interesting ones, creative ones, like you refresh the UI, you redesign the information architecture, or you sold your soul to the devil. And yeah, we consider selling our soul to the devil, but it looked pretty busy already. So we actually redesigned the information architecture instead. Now, you might not be too familiar with this term, information architecture, but don't worry, I'll get to that in a few slides. And I guess for now, we can just say that it's one of the disciplines of user experience design, which brings me straight into my next point. That is, despite what many people think, user experience, UX and UI, user experience and user interface are not exactly the same thing. And so now I guess I'll spend the rest of this talk to prove it to you. But I promised you a story, and so let's go back to where it all started. You might remember the good old days when we used to go to this place called the office. Actually, this group of people in the picture is not us, it's not my team, but it resembles one of the most common office scenarios. Try to picture this, right? I was there at the office, my coffee, checking my email in the morning. Actually recently hired and assigned to a new product team. And so I overhear this conversation about a recent customer case that was open, where the issue was that it took very long to load our product's homepage. And so I listen carefully, and then I do what everyone, at the office do. I get closer and I just throw around my personal recommendation. Hey, why don't we paginate everything on that homepage and reduce the API calls to the backend? And so if you remember about the office, then you should also remember what happens next in these kind of situations. Basically, everyone just goes, back to their desk. And that's what I did too, because, other priorities were waiting for me. So I just went back to my to-do list and left the engineer dealing with it, really. And talking about the customer case, here is an extract from that customer case, a screenshot that I took. And as you can tell, the customer was not very happy. And yeah, I mean, you see like how I put it together here. I decided to put it up on the wall virtually and in a golden frame, because I felt like this is one to remember, right? And the reason is this is an important sign that things have changed. More and more, when users are complaining about something, they, I would say, finally know what is it that they want, and they know how to call it, a better user experience. And that strikes me more every day. But back to our customer case, let me maybe just spend 2 slides, I swear, no longer than a minute, to give you some technical and contextual information here. So the product I'm talking about is an API management service, and this, it was acquired by Red Hat in 2016. And after the acquisition, more enterprise customers started using the product. So different customer base equals different needs. And this specific new customer is a high-profile customer from the public transportation sector. They're, of course, offering a public service, and so they're looking for a pretty solid solution. For that reason, the customer is running a series of stress tests of their infrastructure and of the service itself. They're trying to integrate 150 APIs here. But wait a moment, like, maybe you're wondering what is this API management thing I've been talking about. So I really don't have the time to deep dive into technical details today, but maybe I can spend 30 seconds trying to frame this. Let's put it this way. I'm pretty sure you have some kind of Maps app on your phone. Most probably the Maps app is also giving you some more info than not just maps, such as public transportation, info and updates. And what happens there is that the Maps app doesn't have the data. Most likely it's leveraging external data published by, let's say, like the local public transportation authority. An API is what basically makes it possible for that data to be surfaced in the app. And so now imagine that you are the public transportation authority. You don't want third parties to display your data, but you don't want to receive like zillions of calls per second to your system, which would basically kill your servers. So you want to protect from attacks and only have authorized requests getting through. And that's what an API management tool can do for you, among other things that I don't have the time to dive into. So the kind of UX and UI challenges we'll be discussing today are the ones that someone, some company who wants to manage their APIs is facing, like the customer that I was mentioning a moment ago. And so back to our customer case, here is what the product UI looked like when many APIs had been integrated into our system. Nothing too fancy, very functional dashboard UI, the kind of UI that gets the job done, which is honestly like what our users want most of the time. No fuss, no frills. You have a minimal navigation menu at the top that includes a filter to find your API, and then scrolling down the page, you have the upper half of the page that's taken by this widget that displays customer engagement. And below you'll find a list of all your integrated APIs, each with their own details and traffic data points, kind of like a API preview. And there's nothing wrong with it, really. I guess until you scroll below the fold, and you will notice that if you have integrated a lot of APIs, they're all listed there, and each and any of those API would have a preview that would send requests to multiple requests to the backend. So more requests, more time to process them. It's not wrong per se. Maybe it's a pretty good user experience when you only have a handful of them, but probably not really, the best user experience when you're scaling up to processing, say, maybe hundreds of them, like our customer was trying to do. And so the engineering team is on it, and they really tried all to fix the issue. They follow a few of the approaches that we mentioned at the beginning, such as code optimization, caching improvement, etc. And they do actually improve page loading time a little bit, but not significantly. So at this point, a few weeks had passed, and here is when the customer writes that comment I showed you earlier. Now, I have to be fair. This gift doesn't give the right credit to our engineers. We have an awesome engineering team. I love them. It's just that this is basically what happens when you're prompt, with an impossible ask. Given at that point, no code optimization could have solved the issue that we were facing. And so the ball is passed to UXD, aka us. And again, to avoid any misunderstandings, I swear this is not what the PM said, but we knew for sure we didn't have room to plan any full-on design research study, etc. We had to act very quickly. So what do you expect designers do when they jump on board? They ask for data, and that's what we decided to do. First thing, we asked for telemetry data. At this point, the engineers had created a mock environment, and they were, testing our platform against 1,000 of APIs, because that's a good reference number, for larger enterprise customers. As you can see here from the screenshots of the browser data, it turned out it would take more than 40 seconds to load the dashboard, aka the homepage of our product, which meant, no good news for us. So we had to act quickly. I told you that already, and we take a first stab at it. And we do that by, I guess, doing what everybody would probably expect. We try to patch it, which for us means we just try to rework the UI. So as a first iteration, we paginate the endless table. But as it happens, very often, I would say, with UX work, we realize pretty soon that it's not easy as it seems. Paginating the table actually improved the performance a little bit, but it actually deteriorated the user experience because it made it harder, to access the full catalog of APIs. Also, maybe you remember that I just mentioned that as part of the navigation menu, we had an API filter, so that was still loading the entire list of APIs in the menu. So we didn't really solve the problem here. So we decided to step back. We get together and we decide that we, to define what our design goals are. And so we decided we want to first create a homepage that's a dashboard and not a hybrid between a dashboard and a navigation tool, which is what the homepage looked like, because it included, the list of all your APIs. As a consequence of that, we also want to simplify the navigation, of course, and we want to help users understand the logic behind the application, the platform architecture, and all the various components. Last but not least, we want to, or we'd love to at that point, I guess, establish a pattern that we could reuse to fix other known scalability issues across the UI. And yeah, so to do that, we go back to an idea that was shared a few months prior to that, and that would involve redesigning the information architecture of the product. Now we're back to information architecture here. In case you're new to this, information architecture is basically where the information is displayed and how it is organized across the UI. You can see in the screenshot here that we were live prototyping a low fidelity version of an alternative menu, and that's how we really started, all of our design process. So let me now show you the outcome of our design iterations and give you maybe a little demo. Here is the new information architecture that we designed. We basically decided to move the exploration of APIs into two distinct sections and out of the main navigation menu. You see that there's two new items in the menu, one for products and backends APIs. Maybe that terminology doesn't make much sense for you, but those are two different kind of API objects. So we had one for each specific API object, and you can easily reach them from the menu, and that will lead you to the paginated full list of APIs that you see here in the screenshot. Of course, that table will be filterable, searchable, etc. And then we identified the most important API details that we wanted to surface in the table, and also decided to keep the shortcuts for pro users who wanted to access specific API features right away without going through the API overview page and so on. And back to our infamous homepage dashboard, we finally turned that into, I guess, what is the first step towards being a real dashboard. Not there yet, but in the process. And we do that by first removing the list of all the APIs and creating two widgets that you see here. You see the top, the upper half of the page is unchanged. The audience widget is still there, but below there's these two new widgets listing the 5 most used APIs for each kind of APIs. Together, we direct call to actions to either create new APIs or explore, the full list of APIs by leading you to those sections that I showed you a couple of slides ago. And yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So in terms of outcomes, this is actually the fun part. In a few weeks, we basically generate all the design artifacts. We hand them over to the engineering team who implements them rather quickly, really, because we are leveraging our Panafly design system. And so then we ask them to repeat the tests. And here we are with our success numbers. As you can clearly see on version 2.5, which is the version that the customer was currently on at that point, if we took 44 seconds to load 1,024 APIs, it was a little bit faster with the latest stable release with 2.9, but still unacceptable. And with our better release, it took only 1.5 seconds, which is definitely unacceptable time. Which brings me back to the first slide I showed to you, where we can see that there was basically an improvement of 96%. But let me maybe take a moment to recap exactly what happened there, and maybe I'll share with you a little bit more of our process, right? So we first asked for telemetry data, so we collected the data, and then first quick iteration, but then we defined what our design goals were. And when that was done, we started designing and iterating, on our prototypes. And when those were ready, we, asked to implement and repeat the tests and collect more data and restart with the process. This is probably not rocket science for most of you, especially if you are used to standard design thinking practices. But maybe this is something new for your stakeholders to try. And so, it was in our case at least. And as a matter of fact, there's a few lessons that we learn as a team. And when I say as a team, I mean as a product team, you know. So let's see if I have convinced you of the powers of UX here, because this is really just one of the many success stories that the UXD team can share. And it's not that my team was any special. This is the kind of challenges we face every day with our work as UX designers. But despite that, I guess that they are not always prioritized as they should be. And as a consequence, we very often don't get a chance to work on them. So yeah, let's jump into the lessons that we learned, starting with, as we mentioned in the beginning, UX is more than UI. And UX can actively contribute to solving technical problems. As much as this looks pretty straightforward, it is not a trivial one, which brings me to these second lessons that we learned, that backing UX work with data validates the effort in the eye of the business unit and the engineering team. In fact, we got buy-in to kick off a second round of UI scalability improvements across the entire UI design. And most importantly, as a product team, we modified our project workflow on Jira so that most issues, after being defined by the PM, are now reviewed by the UX team before moving them over to the engineering column. I guess you're familiar with some kind of ticket management tool. So like we do have the PM defined column, like it gets into UX review and then eventually gets into ready for engineering. By doing that, by reviewing those technical issues together with engineering, there's a good chance that UXD can now spot opportunities for improvements pretty early in the process, and eventually, propose solutions before, let's say, actually even one line of code is being written, which is pretty good. Third lesson, last but not least for sure. At the time, we had just put on hold, for mostly for lack of prioritization and resources, a project for the overall of the UI, and basically just to make it consistent with the newer version of our panel design system. And so we took this opportunity instead to introduce all new components from the latest version of the design system little by little when adding new UI elements to the new pages that we were creating, which is something that it's still in progress too. So we're changing the UI not all at once, but like changing little things here and there. And yeah, I always love when I can take home a few action items after attending a talk. And here are just a few of my recommendations that you might want to consider adopting in your day-to-day. Maybe this one is a little bit obvious, but still worth repeating. Always try to have design involved from day one. How do you do that? We just talked about modifying the product workflow. That's actually a good thing you might want to try, but that might not be enough, or maybe it's too soon for you and your team. And so I would say if you're a PM, just invite your designers, to business unit and roadmap meetings. Give them space. It's really as simple as that. Just make them part of the conversation. If you're a designer, instead, I would say try to identify who the right stakeholders are, PM directors, etc., and ask to get invited to their meetings. You join the meeting, you stay quiet and absorb knowledge, and then when you spot a design opportunity, you add an agenda item to the next meeting agenda that you want to discuss that. When the day of the meeting comes, you make a proposal, you illustrate the design opportunity you have identified, and you call out what kind of business improvement it will bring to the product. And I understand that might not be your cup of tea, but you do have allies with that. So just try to involve the engineers you're already working with as soon as possible. You know them, they know you. for once, maybe instead of like inviting them to a meeting where you're sharing design requirements, book them for an open conversation and ask them about issues at the technical level that are related to the design opportunity that you have identified. And also beg them if necessary, to capture tangible data that you can then share with your stakeholders. Last recommendation, last but not least again, you should really strive to stick to low fidelity and get constant feedback from stakeholders and peers, engineering included, of course. Like a proposal for a new feature doesn't need a drop shadow on your tables to be understood. It's probably more useful to show user flows and then just a makeshift idea of a UI, especially I would say if your product team is leveraging a design system. Then you don't even need to clarify every single detail. The engineer, can pick up your lo-fi wireframes, start coding the backbone, and then apply design system components on top of it. This will for sure save you time and probably frustration too. For instance, and this might need a separate talk really, but let me just touch on this. As a long-term consequence of the project I just walked you through, we also created a low fidelity library of our own design system, and it's been a success on the UXD team. So now we're all always going, through wireframing first, low fidelity wireframing first, before and trying to get a feedback, based on that. All right, we are at the end of the presentation. I just wanted to take the opportunity here to underline that this success was only possible thanks to more colleagues than for our product team. Here you see the mandatory headshots, team picture. You have designers, engineers, managers, and PMs all together. More importantly, I guess, I just touched on a lot of different aspects of the project here because we don't have we only have a certain amount of time. But if you want to learn more, first you're always welcome to contact me. Second, we wrote an article that we published on the Red Hat official blog, and that includes a lot more details about the story. And here you can find a link to it, and maybe I can share it with Rory so he can paste it in the respective chats or channels. So yeah, this is it. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to take any questions now. And as usual, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alessandro. That was really interesting. I love the case study approach. Yeah, I just have one or two questions that I've thought of as we've been going through that. But if anybody has any questions out there, please feel free. You can either put them in the chat box on UXDX, or if you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching it from, please just enter the questions that you have there. But the first thing that I thought of as you were going through your presentation, did you have any negative feedback from the low usage people that the redesign made things a little bit more difficult? Or was it generally kind of seen as a positive thing?
It was seen as a positive thing. So that's a good question. I mostly, I guess, focus on quantitative data. I showed you how we improved the experience by showing you how, in terms of percentage, how long did it take for the page to load after we brought our design changes. And that's because we don't really have, clear qualitative insights that we can share. We got them, but they're very hard to quote because we don't have, unfortunately, a direct connection with the customers. The support team has a direct connection with the customers, and so I really begged them to give me that sentence that I wanted to put there. But in general, both the customer itself and other users, like internal users and other customers, were pleasantly surprised, by the changes in the information architecture. So it worked.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess if it's down to 1.5 seconds, they're probably seeing it. Even if you're low usage, you're probably seeing a performance boost as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of Alessandro's talk. If you do have any questions for Alessandro, please just put them into the chat and I'll post those on the UXDX Slack group and we'll put those questions to Alessandro. But up next, the show does go on. So we have Michele Ronsen, who will be talking about what is a rolling research program. So welcome, Michele.
Hi, everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So the UXDX team asked me to talk about rolling research, and I'm prepared to share a ton about it with you. I'm going to go ahead and start my slideshow here. Hopefully you can see the cover slide. Can I get a confirmation that we're good to go
everything's
here?
looking good and you're good to go.
Awesome. And I've also created some resources for you as well. So if we could share our resources, that'd be great. For those of you that might not know me, my name is Michele Ronsen. I'm a user research executive, coach, and educator. I teach people around the world how to break into the field, how to upskill. I do a ton of corporate trainings and team trainings. I am a classically trained designer that moved into research about 12 years ago. And I founded my latest firm, Curiosity Tank, about 4 years ago with the explicit purpose to help people learn how to ask better questions and make more confident decisions. Super grateful for LinkedIn. LinkedIn named me a top voice influencer in 2020, the first user researcher ever. So I communicate a lot on LinkedIn. I'm super, super passionate about user research. And I'm also a practicing researcher. So for context, here are some of the questions that I'm asked to explore most frequently. And this will set the stage for our conversations today as they relate to rolling research, because rolling research typically only relates to evaluative questions. What we have here are both evaluative and generative questions. So generative research questions typically happen in the beginning of the product development or service development cycle, and evaluative research questions occur once we actually have something to evaluate. I also lead a program called Ask Like a Pro, in which I take user researchers through every single phase of the design process and mentor them and provide guidance as they're working on actual research projects. So you may hear me refer to a lot of things in terms of Ask Like a Pro, and some of the resources that I shared with you come from the Ask Like a Pro learning and training series. And if you haven't had a chance, you'll want to download these resources, because there's also an 1.5-hour event focused specifically on rolling research. And it's a panel discussion where I've invited the leaders of the rolling research programs from Zillow and Pinterest and Google and Roku, and you can hear firsthand about their programs as well. So what is rolling research? In a nutshell, it's an iterative method. It's a continuous approach where we're conducting studies on a regular, ongoing basis. Typically, we're conducting studies, or I would say more frequently, teams are conducting studies with distinct start and stop times. Rolling research occurs on a regular cadence. It can usually follow the same product or service throughout the development life cycle, or it can rotate from question to question or team to team. But it's hugely beneficial. Mostly more UX mature teams have rolling research programs in development, but it really allows for super in-depth understanding over a period of time continuously. super well suited for agile teams because it continually gathers feedback, and then the teams incorporate it into the design or the development process iteratively. And rolling research can be applied or implemented through a variety of methods, and I'm going to get more into this a little bit later. And the frequency varies depending upon the needs of the team or the organization or what's being developed. The most common experience I have personally with rolling research and developing rolling research programs is on a weekly cadence. As you'll hear from the other experts I had the panel discussion with, it fluctuates from weekly to twice a month to 2 weeks on to 2 weeks off to monthly. None of them were actually running it on a quarterly basis, but some people might consider rolling research for, say, like NPS scores or something like that, CSAT scores. That also can sometimes be referred to as rolling research, but that's not really what I'm going to talk to you about today. Rolling research on a weekly or bi-monthly or even monthly basis requires a super clear structure, flexibility, and adaptability. And we need all those things in place in order for it to be deployed successfully. The most common thing about rolling research is that it uses the same something, right? It uses either the same methodology, the same recruiting approach, the same schedule, or the same output. And it's usually a combination of these things so that we can do it week after week after week and keep delivering on it. So something is consistent, and that consistency is required for us to be predictable and to time it in order to commit and deliver on this rolling rhythm. And I'm going to give you some more examples about that. The most common thread here, again, is predictability, right? So the program structure, the program cadence, the type of questions rolling research programs can explore, who they explore them with, etc., really vary. But it's the predictability that's the most common thread. So what questions does rolling research explore? Typically, it explores evaluative questions, right? Some examples of evaluative questions would be what you see here. So this is evaluative questions in terms of there is something for the respondents to evaluate. The product or service has been developed to a point where there is either a storyboard or a paper prototype or even a low or high fidelity prototype, or those are all visual stimuli, but sometimes maybe it's going to be audible stimuli. Think about like a call script or a VRU or a conversation with Alexa or Alexa telling you a joke or something like that. So it can be audible, it can be visual, or it can be literal. Also, it could be product description or write-up or a comparison of different products and services according to maybe different tiers of service. So the stimuli itself can also vary depending upon the team, but we typically are including evaluative questions in rolling research because it's more tactical. So what kinds of participants are included? This is a really good question and one that I field a lot about. And the truth is that it can include all types of participants, all types of segments. But recruiting is definitely a significant consideration when building a rolling research program because you need to have those people like ready at, within arm's reach to be solicited and recruited and scheduled on that weekly or bi-monthly or monthly basis. So recruiting is a challenge to definitely consider when you're building any sort of rolling research program, but there's many ways to resolve this. As I've explored my own solutions and as I've had conversations with many other teams about how they go about this as well. I'm happy to answer any specific questions too. People also ask which stakeholders are involved and how. And I hate to say it varies, but I didn't. I said it depends, which is also true. So the stakeholders who are involved in the rolling research program also vary by team, as is the person who's leading the study. Sometimes there's a dedicated rolling researcher that is focused 100% on the rolling research program. Sometimes it's a staff researcher, and staff researchers roll in and out, or they'll do like 1 month on, 3 months off, 1 month on, 3 months off, and it kind of rotates through the team. Other times there might be a research contractor that's dedicated to it. In other instances, other disciplines or other functions are running rolling research. And those are scenarios in which we're training designers or PMs or engineer, sales, L&D, marketing. Also, the stakeholders themselves can vary, because those are the people who are bringing the questions forward for exploration. So the question sets themselves might arise from the design team or the product team or the eng team or marketing, whomever. So that also influences the stakeholders that are involved. Stakeholder expectations also vary widely. I know sometimes teams often require like a research sponsor or a research lead to oversee the work if it's not being run through the research program. There may be a um, research lead or a research sponsor to make sure that the questions are the right size and that they are appropriate for the rolling research program, that they align towards the broader goals, and they also help ensure quality work. But the stakeholders themselves can represent different functions um, in the organization as well. I know some programs require stakeholders to contribute at a certain level. Some of them say may be required to watch all of the sessions live or participate in debrief sessions. So the program structures really vary, and as well as the stakeholder expectations and who the stakeholders are, as well as who is leading the research. There's no one right formula. The formula itself is going to be highly dependent upon the culture in which you're operating in, the resources, the talent and skills, the commitment, the adaptability, the flexibility, the team, the project, and things like that. So there's many different benefits and drawbacks to rolling research. I love developing, designing, deploying, and conducting rolling research. It's super quick. You get a tremendous amount of impact versus the time invested. I love the predictability of it. My stakeholders love the predictability of it. It's a terrific approach to align the team to a very specific timeline. The deliverables tend to be much leaner than in a typical research project. And by the deliverables, I mean the final outputs. I love the fact that it's repeatable, it's informative, and it has a templated process. Now, again, that process is going to vary a little bit from team to team, but it's also a terrific opportunity for new researchers to break into the field. It's a terrific opportunity for new researchers to implement on a lot of different studies very quickly, which will then expedite their learning. It will increase their experience, and they're able to see how the learnings are applied very quickly. So you think about any researcher, let alone a new researcher, conducting rolling research for, say, 6 months. I mean, they could easily have 18 studies under their belt in that amount of time. And that's just a tremendous amount of experience to acquire in such a small amount of time. Some of the cons that come with rolling research programs are that it's difficult for a single researcher to maintain this over a long period of time. There's a lot of burnout. So I know some teams build in blocks of time for like recovery, or they build in after X amount of rolling research studies, they roll onto a different type of study, which will have a different methodology to it. Right. There's somewhat of a lack of variety in terms of the methodology because most of the questions are also evaluative. There's also a lot of context switching. You could be running a project for a different team or on a different product or feature every week or twice a month. So you're constantly like acquiescing to your environment. which I think is super fun, but that is not necessarily a good fit for everyone. Another consideration is the person who's conducting the rolling research really needs to acquire a certain degree of methodological expertise. And this is really in lieu of subject matter expertise because the subject can change every week, right? So again, it's not really for everyone. It's not necessarily a good personality fit. It's not a good pace fit. I think it's totally fun. I think it's a great way to explore, try new methods, improve your skills, increase your pace, and also a great exercise, especially for academics looking to transition into industry, because the pace is so different and rolling research requires you to be so much more succinct in your communications and your outputs. As I mentioned earlier, there are some recruitment constraints. You need some recruitment support in place, whether that is a dedicated recruiter internally or externally, or a participant pool that you can regularly draw from. But all of these things have certainly been resolved at many teams around the world. And you also want to ensure that just because you're conducting rolling research, and rolling research by nature is lean, you want to make sure that lean doesn't mean superficial and that action is indeed taken. So here's a quick overview on some of the pros and cons of rolling research. And I mentioned also quite a variety in terms of structure, in terms of benefit, in terms of stakeholders and methodologies. The variations themselves differ in terms of the methods that are acceptable to one program versus another, recruitment processes and approaches, also the outputs. The outputs are much leaner than typical research studies, but the deliverable type and the fidelity can also really vary. Some teams I know have a specific number of participants or a specific number of questions that they will not exceed. So, for example, we'll speak with 5 people each week, and we'll ask them 5 questions max. So, in terms of quantity of participants and questions, there are some variables there. I talked a little bit about the resources and how to resource a rolling research program. I've seen dedicated staff, I've seen shared and vary staff, I've seen rotations, contractors. Sometimes senior talent is leading the rolling research program, sometimes junior talent, sometimes the studies are blind, sometimes they're branded. Also, the stakeholders themselves and the expectations and their requirements can also differ quite a bit. In addition, each team has its own, kind of culture, and each industry has its own culture. So there are some cultural differences as well. And the intake process, right? How will you accept or evaluate or vet whether or not something is appropriate for user research, and that team and that particular method, recruitment, output, resource, things like that also varies. But there are a lot of similarities too. As I mentioned earlier, stakeholders are critical, right? How and when stakeholders contribute to the process does vary, but there always needs to be a stakeholder. And there's always repeatable processes that are in place. These repeatable processes typically include the research question or size, the scheduling and the recruitment, alignment with a sprint, how someone signs up or gets into the queue, how it's vetted, what's discussed. There are typically very stringent cutoff dates to get the stimuli into the rolling research program. Stakeholder involvement is always required to some degree, and the outputs. Right? So again, the outputs can really vary as well. So what do rolling research outputs look like? I mentioned they're typically a little bit leaner. Okay. So I've shared with you here some of my simplified deliverable from rolling research programs that I have run. So what you see here is I ran a concepts study. I had 5 concepts for the redesign of a healthcare website, the desktop experience. And I ultimately built this program out. We ran over 180 studies in 18 months in a rolling research program. So we were conducting 1, 2, or 3 studies a week across 4 segments to develop it from this. These were 2 of the initial 5 concepts all the way through to handoff to the development team for every single part of the website. So for instance, I would conduct research on Thursdays. I would analyze and synthesize on Fridays. I would present very lean deliverables to the design team and the eng lead on Mondays. This is an example of my visual markups. This is what I would present. Monday evening, we would decide what we were going to test the following Thursday. Tuesday, I would begin my recruit. Wednesday, I would author my discussion guide and schedule, and designs were due Wednesday night for Thursday testing. So it's very, very quick. And it's enormous. The impact of this is just enormous. Now, for the client, I were deliverables like this, right? So what you see on the left was week 1. You can see the date here is October 13th, 2015. This was 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago for my first rolling research program. Week 2, you see what we tested, the key takeaways, and the date there is April 21st. Okay. Week 3, oops, I think I went backwards. There we go. And we're progressing in fidelity as we move through the product development cycle. But again, these deliverables are extremely simplified. You have to simplify something, a lot of things actually, in order to deliver on that cadence. So the outputs vary, but they're going to be consistent within the team. I know some teams have like a strict 9-slide format, and it includes very specific things. Other teams use only a top-line report, but they have very specific consistency in other areas. My preference has always been visual markups because I work really closely with the designers. And that's a very easy way for me to communicate what's working well, what's not, what's resonating, where are the opportunities, what we might want to explore or do differently. And there's lots of other variables as well. So, does rolling research make sense for your organization? That's going to depend, right? It's going to depend on whether your team has the structure or the wherewithal to develop the structure, the discipline, what sort of guardrails you're going to put in place, like what will the rolling research program be built to handle and what will it not? There's also talent required to conduct the studies. Clearly, someone with rolling research experience before or previously will be in a better position to build a rolling research program because they have some sort of transferable knowledge, but not necessarily maintain the program. And those could be 2 separate people. You also want stakeholder buy-in, and there needs to be like a real commitment to execute on the learnings. Some sort of recruitment process is going to be required in order for you to deliver on the cadence and adaptability. So those are just of the few things that I would encourage you to consider if you're interested in building rolling research at your organizations. I know that all of these companies have really robust rolling research programs. It's something very popular. The impact is enormous. The progress and the iterative nature, you really can't get any better, right? You really can't get any better than building a rolling research program to align the team and to get everybody on the same page and commit to deadlines and improving and iterating in the same cadence. So again, here are some resources that I put together for you guys. I invite you to look at it. There's also a link in there to the 1.5, 2-hour discussion, panel discussion with rolling research leaders from other organizations. And I invite any sort of questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michele. That was really, really interesting. I enjoyed the kind of digging into all the pros and cons as well, because it's great just saying everything's perfect, but in reality, there's always challenges.
There are enormous challenges to building a rolling research program. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So, yeah, if anybody has any questions, I know some people were posting some from the last session, so please do post in whatever platform you're in. But I had one or two questions coming out of that I'd love to dig into. So,
Sure.
If I start with the one in continuous discovery habits, Teresa Torres talks about automating your kind of ways that you can try automate the people, your recruitees or interviewees. And one challenge that I've always seen faced by teams is it's kind of difficult that if you give that structure where you're always doing your testing on a Thursday or something, so you're trying to minimize the context switching too much for the team by having it on a set date. How does that work with customers' availability? Because maybe the customers don't work with that. So how do you balance those two kind of competing, what the customer's availability is and then the context switching of the team?
Well, again, like the repeatable nature of a rolling research program is it's paramount. You have many more customers than you do rolling researchers or rolling research projects. So that's why building a recruitment strategy and a recruitment approach that is going to allow you to deliver on whatever cadence your team has set up is so important. So in my instance, for the healthcare organization, I built my own participant pool and I continue to feed the pool constantly, week after week after week, with new questions. And I was thinking 4 weeks in advance, what are we going to want to learn about then? Okay, we're going to want to get feedback from people who have chronic conditions. We're going to want to get feedback from healthcare brokers. We're going to want to get feedback from people who are healthcare proxies, because we were testing all of these different things in the site as we developed it. So you're constantly like thinking ahead to build your pool so that you have the right people to tap into when you need it. That's what's worked
Excellent.
out.
And just on that, with all of the different kind of styles of people or personas or whatever use cases,
Mhm.
do you mix your generative with your evaluative? Because I guess, as you kind of mentioned, there is the generative usually happens earlier, but I think there's some good value in just kind of trying to understand generative throughout a kind of a unstructured kind of learning throughout the project. So how do you, or what's your approach to trying to mix a little bit of generative and evaluative? Do you do them in the same session or very much separate sessions?
I think that is going to be really dependent on what the question set is. If the question, the overarching question is really what's working well and what's not, that's purely evaluative. If the question set is what's working well, what's not, and how can we improve it, then there's, typically a more generative, some more generative questions in there. I have no problems working on that. Simultaneously, one of my favorite questions or question sets to explore is, are we building the right thing versus are we building the thing right? And those are two very different questions. So in the rolling research programs that I've built and the studies that I've conducted, I am very comfortable jumping, to both sides, provided, of course, everything is happening according to that, very structured approach. If I have the questions on Monday, I can, draft the discussion guide on Tuesday, recruit on Wednesday, get the stimuli Wednesday night, test on Thursday. So as long as it's meeting the schedule, um, I that to me like is one of the most fun parts because that introduces more variety. And it
Excellent.
also allows you to explore and just flex kind of different muscles. Yeah. But some programs would say no. We only do evaluative. We only do, X or Y.
Brilliant.
So.
All right, well, that actually brings us to time, but if anybody has any questions, please do keep sending them in and we'll put those through to Michele on the Slack group. But that's it for tonight. So thank you very much, Michele.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So that brings us to the end of our event for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, we do host larger scale conferences, and our next one coming up is in New York in May, where we'll have 25 speakers. We're running 8 workshops. There'll be 800 attendees there, it's always just a fantastic feeling getting back into a room and getting the energy of everybody who's kind of trying to improve their craft as well. So if you do want to join us, tickets are on sale at the moment. We'll be releasing the draft agenda in the next day or so. So please do come along and join us for that. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the event tonight, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.